The red dust of Talos 7 swirled around David's boots as he stepped off the cargo ramp. His ship hissed and groaned behind him, smoke trailing from the left engine. 3 weeks of hauling medical supplies across the sector, and now this. A busted coolant line on a planet that had been stripped clean and abandoned 5 years ago. He kicked at a rock and watched it tumble down the slope. The twin suns beat down on his shoulders, making him squint even through his visor. His scanner showed nothing but empty mining tunnels and collapsed excavation sites. No help, no people, just him and a ship that would not fly until he found replacement parts in the wreckage somewhere. David grabbed his toolkit and started walking toward the nearest canyon. Old mining operations meant old equipment, and old equipment meant salvage. His boots crunched on the brittle ground as he made his way down the rocky path. That was when he heard it, a sound like grinding stone, followed by a low rumble that made his chest vibrate. He froze, hand moving to the plasma cutter on his belt. The sound came again, deeper this time, almost like words. He rounded a bend in the canyon and stopped dead. A creature lay pinned beneath a massive pile of boulders. It was enormous, easily the size of his cargo ship. Scales the color of bronze covered its body, and a long tail stretched out from beneath the rocks. Wings, torn and bent, were crushed against the canyon wall. The head was free, resting on the ground, and two golden eyes stared at him with an intelligence that made his skin prickle. "Human," the creature said. Its voice came through his translator, deep and rough. "Turn around, leave this place." David's mouth fell open. He had heard of the Vracs, the dragon-like species that controlled 3 systems in the outer rim. Warriors and conquerors, his teacher had called them. Species that viewed kindness as weakness and strength as the only virtue worth having. "You're hurt," David said, finding his voice. "I am dying," the Vracs corrected. "The ground shook 6 cycles ago. The rocks fell. I cannot move. This is my end." David walked closer, eyes scanning the rubble. Tons of stone and twisted metal covered the creature's body. He could see where the weight pressed down on the scales, creating deep grooves. Dark blood had pooled and dried beneath the rocks. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough to accept my fate, human. Now go. Your presence changes nothing." David knelt and pulled out his scanner, running it over the debris pile. The device beeped and hummed, feeding him data, load-bearing points, structural weaknesses, pressure distribution. His mind started working through the problem like any engineering challenge he had faced. "I'm David," he said absently, still studying the readings. The Vrax's eyes narrowed. "I am Ralph, and you are wasting your time." "Maybe." David stood and walked around the pile, examining it from different angles. "What happened exactly?" "Seismic activity, common on depleted mining worlds. The supports in this canyon failed. I was surveying for the Empire when it happened." Ralph's voice carried no emotion, just flat acceptance. "I have made peace with death, human. Your species is too small, too weak to move these stones. Leave before you injure yourself." David ignored him and headed back toward his ship. His mind was already running calculations, weight ratios, leverage points, equipment he could use. "Human," Ralph called after him, "where are you going?" "Getting my gear," David shouted back. "For what purpose?" "To get you out." A sound like grinding stones echoed through the canyon. It took David a moment to realize the Vrax was laughing. "Impossible. You cannot move this much weight. Even a Vrax excavation team would struggle. One human, foolish." David stopped and turned around. "Has anyone ever told you that humans are really bad at accepting impossible?" "That is not courage, that is stupidity." "Maybe both," David shrugged. "Either way, I'm not leaving you here to die." He walked back to his ship and began pulling equipment from the cargo hold. Hydraulic jacks, leverage bars, climbing cables rated for 20 tons. He loaded everything onto a hoversled and dragged it back to the canyon. Ralph watched him approach with something between confusion and annoyance. You doom yourself. Your ship is damaged. You have limited supplies. Wasting your energy on a lost cause will kill you. Probably, David agreed, setting up the first hydraulic jack at a calculated point beneath a large boulder. But I've got to try anyway. Why? David paused, looking up at the massive creature trapped in stone. Because you're alive, and you don't have to be alone when you die. But I'm betting on option 2, which is getting you out of here. Ralph stared at him for a long moment. Humans are strange. Yeah, we get that a lot. David activated the jack, and it began to whine as it pushed against the boulder. The rock shifted a fraction of a centimeter. Progress. He wiped sweat from his forehead and positioned the second jack. The twin suns climbed higher in the sky, baking the canyon floor. His water supply would last maybe 3 days at this rate. His food, even less. But he had been in tight spots before. This is madness, Ralph muttered. David grinned and kept working. Sweat dripped into David's eyes as he worked the leverage bar beneath another boulder. 2 days had passed since he found Ralph, and his hands were raw with blisters. The hydraulic jacks hummed around him, pushing against the rocks with steady pressure. So far, he had managed to shift maybe 3% of the debris. Not much, but it was something. Ralph had stopped telling him to leave after the first day. Now the Vraks just watched in silence as David worked, golden eyes tracking every movement. Sometimes David caught something in that gaze that looked almost like curiosity. "Tell me about your empire," David said, grunting as he threw his weight against the bar. The boulder shifted another centimeter. "Why do you wish to know?" "Because talking makes the time go faster." David repositioned the bar and pushed again. "And because I'm curious." Ralph made a rumbling sound in his chest. "The Vraks empire spans 3 systems. We are warriors. We take what we need and defend what we claim. Strength is the highest virtue. Weakness is contempt." Sounds exhausting. It is survival. David paused to drink from his water bottle. He had already gone through half his supply. At this rate, he would run dry by tomorrow evening. On Earth, we figured out that working together was better than fighting all the time. That is because humans are weak individually. You require groups to survive. True, David set down the bottle and went back to work. But that's not weakness. That's smart. 10 humans working together can do what 100 fighting alone cannot. Ralph's eyes narrowed. You defend mediocrity. I defend cooperation. David pulled out his plasma cutter and began slicing through a twisted beam that had fallen across Ralph's wing. Your people ever think that maybe helping each other might make you all stronger? Helping the weak creates dependency. It reduces the strength of the whole. The plasma cutter hissed and sparked as it cut through metal. David waited until the beam fell away before responding. What if the weak today become strong tomorrow because someone helped them? What if that help creates loyalty, friendship, trust? Those things worth anything in your empire. Ralph fell silent for several minutes. David continued working, moving rocks piece by piece. His muscles screamed at him and his legs trembled with exhaustion. He ignored it all and kept going. "You are injuring yourself," Ralph said finally. "I'm fine." "You are not. I can smell blood. Your hands are damaged." David glanced at his palms. The blisters had burst, leaving raw skin that bled whenever he gripped the tools. He shrugged. "I've had worse." "Human, stop, rest. You will collapse." "Can't, gotta keep going while the daylight holds." David positioned another jack and activated it. "Besides, we're making progress. See, that big rock there moved almost 2 centimeters today." "Insignificant progress." "Progress is progress." David allowed himself a brief smile. "You know what humans are really good at? Being stubborn. We're fantastic at refusing to give up even when we should." "I have noticed." As the twin suns began to set, David finally allowed himself to stop. He collapsed against the canyon wall, chest heaving, and closed his eyes. Every muscle in his body hurt. His hands throbbed. His head pounded from dehydration and heat exposure. "You should leave at first light," Ralph said quietly. "Repair your ship with what you have found and go. This rescue is impossible." David opened one eye, not giving up. "You are killing yourself for someone you do not know, someone from a species that would never do the same for you. This is illogical." "Probably." David pulled out a nutrition bar from his pack and chewed it slowly. "But logic isn't everything. Sometimes you do things because they're right, not because they make sense." "Right according to whom?" "According to me." David finished the bar and drank the last of his water for the day. "Look, I don't know much about Vrax's culture. Maybe you really would leave someone to die. But humans, we've got this thing where we help people in trouble, even strangers, even enemies sometimes. It's just what we do." Ralph's tail twitched slightly beneath the rocks. "You will die here if you continue." "Maybe, or maybe I'll get you out and we'll both live. Won't know unless I try." "This is madness." David laid down on the hard ground, using his pack as a pillow. "Yeah, you mentioned that before. Get some rest, Ralph. Tomorrow I'm going after that big keystone boulder, the one holding everything else in place. That boulder weighs more than your entire ship. You cannot move it." "Watch me." David closed his eyes, already planning the approach. He would need to rig a pulley system using the cables. Maybe use the ship's auxiliary power to drive a winch. It would be tricky, dangerous even, but possible. Everything was possible if you worked the problem hard enough. Above them, alien stars began to appear in the darkening sky. Ralph watched the human sleep, this strange creature that defied all logic. The Vrax could not understand it. Humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be selfish. Yet here was one destroying himself to save a stranger. "Madness," Ralph whispered again. But this time there was something different in his voice, something that almost sounded like hope. David snored softly, already dreaming of pulleys and leverage points. Tomorrow would be the hardest day yet. Tomorrow he would move the impossible. David's hands shook as he connected the last cable to his ship's power core. 4 days now. 4 days of brutal heat, backbreaking work, and dwindling supplies. His water was gone. His food was nearly gone. But the pulley system was finally ready. The massive keystone boulder sat wedged against 3 other rocks, holding the entire collapse together. Move it, and everything else would shift. The trick was making sure it shifted the right way. "This is insane," Ralph said, watching David work. Over the past few days, the dragon's protests had become less forceful, almost conversational. "You are cannibalizing your own ship." "Need the power." David's voice came out as a croak. His throat was raw from the dry air and lack of water. "The hydraulics alone won't cut it. Need the winch motor to pull while the jacks push. And when this is over, your ship will not fly. Cross that bridge when we get there." David tested the cable tension, making sure everything was secure. "Right now, getting you out is priority 1. Ralph made a huffing sound that might have been Vrax's laughter. "You humans confuse priorities with suicide." David managed a weak smile. "It's a fine line." He climbed onto a stable rock and examined the boulder from above. His scanner had mapped every crack, every weak point in the stone. The plan was simple. Use the plasma cutter to weaken the boulder's base, then pull with the winch while the jacks lifted from below. If he calculated correctly, the stone would roll away rather than crushing Ralph further. If he calculated wrong, they would both die. "Tell me about Earth," Ralph said suddenly. David glanced down in surprise. It was the first time Ralph had asked him anything personal. "What do you want to know?" "You speak of cooperation, of humans helping strangers. Where does this come from?" David activated the plasma cutter and the bright blue flame hissed to life. He began cutting carefully along the boulder's base. "We had to learn it. Earth was rough. Predators everywhere, harsh weather. No claws, no fangs, not particularly fast or strong. So we grouped up. Families, tribes, communities, we survived by working together. And this created your philosophy. More or less. The cutter bit deeper into the stone. Pieces flaked away, falling to the canyon floor. We figured out that the person you help today might save your life tomorrow, or their kids might help your kids. It became part of who we are. The Vraks are strong alone. We do not require such arrangements. David paused and looked down at the massive creature pinned beneath tons of rock. How's that working out for you right now? Ralph's eyes flashed with something that might have been anger or might have been amusement. You make a fair point, human. Call me David. We've been at this for 4 days. Think we're past the formal stage. Very well, David. Ralph tested the name. Do all humans possess your stubbornness? Most of us, it's kind of our thing. David finished the first cut and moved to the second angle. We've done some impossible stuff throughout history, built cities in deserts, crossed oceans in wooden boats, went to our moon with less computing power than your translator. When someone tells us something can't be done, we take it as a challenge. Pride. Maybe, or maybe just refusal to accept limitations. The second cut was complete. The boulder was now balanced on a thin point of stone. All right, here we go. This is going to be loud and probably terrifying. Ready. I have been ready to die for many days. Whatever happens next is an improvement. David climbed down and moved to the winch controls. He took a deep breath, said a quick prayer to whatever might be listening, and activated the system. The winch groaned. The cables went taut. The hydraulic jacks screamed as they pushed upward with all their force. The boulder trembled but did not move. David increased the power. The ship's core whined in protest. The cables creaked, stretching to their limits. Still, the boulder held firm. It's not going to work, Ralph said. Shut up, yes it will. David pushed the power to maximum. Warning lights flashed on the control panel. The ship's core was overheating. In about 30 seconds, it would shut down automatically to prevent damage. 20 seconds, the boulder shifted a fraction. 15 seconds, a crack appeared in the base. 10 seconds, the crack widened. 5 seconds, the boulder tilted. The entire system failed at once. The winch motor burned out with a shower of sparks. The hydraulic jacks seized, but the boulder was already moving, rolling away from Ralph with a grinding roar that shook the canyon. David watched in horror as the boulder tumbled straight toward him. He tried to move, but his exhausted legs would not respond fast enough. The massive stone rolled closer, picking up speed. Then something grabbed him. Ralph's arm, freed from the debris, shot out and snatched David from the ground. The Vraks pulled him close as the boulder crashed past, missing them both by centimeters. It tumbled down the canyon and disappeared in a cloud of dust. David found himself pressed against Ralph's chest, the dragon's clawed hand wrapped protectively around him. He could feel the Vrax's heart beating, rapid and strong. You are an idiot, Ralph said quietly. Worked though, didn't it? David's voice shook. Ralph carefully set David down and looked at his arm, the one that had been trapped for days. It was crushed and bent, useless, but it was free. Yes, it worked. David sat heavily, legs finally giving out. His vision swam. When had he last eaten? Yesterday, the day before. David, Ralph said urgently, you are unwell. Just tired, need water. You have no water, you used it all. I know. David tried to stand but fell over instead. The ground felt cool against his face. Sorry, just need a minute. David. But the world was already fading to black. David woke to drops of water hitting his lips. His eyes fluttered open to see Ralph above him, one working arm extended, squeezing liquid from a salvaged container into David's mouth. The dragon's other arm hung useless at his side, but his expression was focused and determined. Drink slowly, Ralph commanded. David obeyed, letting the water trickle down his throat. It tasted metallic, probably from the ship's emergency reservoir, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. After a few moments, his vision cleared and his head stopped spinning. How long was I out? Several hours. I retrieved water from your ship's backup systems. Ralph settled back, still mostly pinned but now with one arm free. You collapsed from dehydration and exhaustion, foolish human. Thanks for the water. David sat up slowly, testing his body. Everything hurt, but he was alive. And thanks for catching me earlier. Ralph looked away. You were saving my life. Allowing you to die would be wasteful. Is that the only reason? The dragon did not answer. Instead, he shifted his weight, testing the rocks that still held him. With the keystone boulder gone, the pressure had reduced significantly. His breathing seemed easier. Can you move your tail? David asked. Ralph tried. His tail twitched, scraped against stone, but remained trapped. Not yet. There is still too much weight. David nodded and stood on shaky legs. He surveyed the remaining debris. Maybe 40% of the original collapse still held Ralph down. With the equipment burned out, they would need to work together manually. Slower, harder, but possible. All right, new plan. I'll position rocks where you can reach them with your free arm. You push or pull based on my directions. We'll work section by section. This will take many more days. Yeah, well, we're not exactly busy. David grabbed a smaller boulder and began rolling it toward Ralph. Besides, gives us time to talk. Tell me more about the wracks. Over the next 3 days, they fell into a rhythm. David would identify which rocks needed moving, then position himself to help while Ralph provided the muscle with his one good arm. They worked in shifts, resting during the hottest part of the day and pushing hard during the cooler mornings and evenings. And they talked. Ralph told stories of the Vrax Empire, battles fought for territory, resources claimed through strength, a culture built entirely on dominance and power. He spoke of his role as a surveyor, exploring potential worlds for conquest. Talus 7 had been his mission when the collapse trapped him. Were you going to recommend this planet for invasion? David asked, straining against a rock while Ralph pulled from the other side. There is nothing here worth taking now. The humans who mined it took everything of value. Stripped it clean, yeah, that's kind of our specialty too, taking what we need. David paused, not always proud of that. Yet you judge the Vrax for doing the same. I judge the Vrax for thinking strength is the only thing that matters. The rock finally shifted, and both of them stumbled as it rolled away. There's more to civilization than who can punch harder. Ralph was quiet for a moment, then said something unexpected. What you did, pulling me from the boulder's path, placing yourself in danger to protect me, that was not logical. Nope. It was not strategic. Definitely not. But it was instinctive. You did not think, you simply acted. David wiped sweat from his forehead. Yeah, that's pretty much how it works. See someone in danger, help them. Don't really think about it. Why? Because that's what you do for people you care about. Ralph's golden eyes fixed on him. You care about me. We are strangers, different species. My people would conquer yours if given the opportunity. Maybe, probably, but right now you're a person who's hurt and needs help. That's all that matters. David met the dragon's gaze steadily. And yeah, I guess I do care. Spent almost a week keeping you company. Kind of hard not to after that. Something shifted in Ralph's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the eyes. Humans are deeply illogical creatures. Guilty as charged. They worked through the afternoon, clearing more debris. Ralph's tail came partially free, and he could wiggle his back legs now. Progress was visible, tangible. David's spirits lifted despite his exhaustion. That night, as they rested, Ralph spoke again. When I return to the Empire, I will report what I have learned here. What have you learned? That strength alone is insufficient, that cooperation has value, that helping others even at personal cost creates bonds that might be stronger than dominance ever could be. Ralph shifted, looking at the stars above. The Empire will not wish to hear this. They will call me weak, contaminated by human philosophy. Will you tell them anyway? Yes, because it is true, and truth matters even when inconvenient. Ralph looked at David. I learned that from you as well. David felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the planet's heat. For what it's worth, I think you'll make some Vraks really angry and some others really thoughtful. Change starts somewhere. Perhaps. Ralph lowered his head, resting it on his one good arm. Sleep, David. Tomorrow we finish this. Tomorrow we finish this, David agreed. He closed his eyes, surrounded by alien stone under alien stars, next to a dragon who was slowly becoming a friend. Whatever came next, whatever challenges waited, they would face them together. And that made all the difference. The sun had barely risen on the 8th day when David realized they had a problem. Only one massive slab remained, pinning Ralph's tail and back legs. It was easily the size of a transport vehicle, wedged at an angle that made leverage nearly impossible. Without the hydraulics or winch, moving it would require either explosives or a miracle. David did not believe in miracles. I can cut it, he said, examining the slab with his scanner. My plasma cutter still has enough charge for one more job. If I fracture it in the right places, it should break into manageable pieces. Ralph shook his head. Too dangerous. The cutting will destabilize the rock. It could shift and crush us both. Got a better idea. Yes, you leave. Go to your ship, activate the emergency beacon. A rescue vessel will come for you eventually. David stared at him. Are you serious right now? After everything we've been through, you want me to just abandon you at the finish line? The finish line is impossible to cross. We have done well, David. I can move my arm, I can breathe easier. I am no longer in constant pain. This is enough. You should save yourself. No, David's voice was flat, final. David, be reasonable. I'm done being reasonable. I'm getting you out of here, and that's the end of it. David pulled out his plasma cutter and checked the charge. I've got enough power for about 10 minutes of cutting. That should be sufficient to create the fracture points I need. And if the slab falls on you while you cut? Then it does, but I'm betting it won't. David looked up at Ralph. Trust me, I've been doing impossible things all week. One more won't hurt. Ralph's eyes reflected something David had not seen before in the proud dragon. Fear, not for himself but for David. I do not want you to die for me. Yeah, well, I don't plan on dying. Plan on finishing this rescue and then figuring out how to get us both off this rock. David positioned himself near the slab and ignited the cutter. Now shut up and let me work. The plasma beam cut into the stone with a high-pitched whine. David worked carefully, creating a web of cuts that would weaken the slab structure without causing immediate collapse. Sweat poured down his face. His arms ached from holding the cutter steady. Every few minutes, the stone would groan and shift slightly, making his heart skip. David, it is moving, Ralph warned. I know, almost done. 3 more cuts, 2 more cuts, 1 more. The final cut completed, and David shut off the cutter. The slab now had a spiderweb of fractures running through it. One good impact should shatter it. The problem was delivering that impact without bringing the whole thing down on their heads. David looked at the emergency beacon power cell attached to his belt. The cell contained enough energy to run a distress signal for 6 months. It also contained enough energy to create a very large explosion if deliberately overloaded. David, what are you thinking? Ralph asked suspiciously. Something stupid. David detached the power cell and began rewiring it. I'm going to overload this cell and place it against the slab. The explosion should shatter the rock along the fracture lines I created. That will kill you. Not if I take cover behind that outcropping over there. David pointed to a shelf of rock about 10 meters away. I'll set a timer, place the charge, and run. Plenty of time. David, no, I forbid this. David looked up surprised. You forbid it? Yes, I will not allow you to risk your life further. If we cannot move the slab safely, then we accept this as the outcome. I remain here. You leave. That is the only acceptable solution. Ralph, buddy, I appreciate the concern. I really do. But I didn't spend 8 days cooking in the desert sun just to walk away now. David finished the rewiring and set the timer for 60 seconds. This will work, and if it doesn't, well, at least I tried. He started to move toward the slab, but Ralph's tail lashed out and blocked his path. The dragon could barely move the appendage, but he managed to get it between David and the rock. No, Ralph said firmly. Move your tail. No. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then David did something that surprised both of them. He sat down and laughed. Not a small chuckle, but a full, exhausted, slightly hysterical laugh. What is funny? Ralph demanded. We're arguing about who gets to risk their life. Most species argue about who has to take the risk. We're fighting over who gets to. David wiped his eyes. Humans really are crazy, and apparently I've infected you with it. Ralph made that huffing sound again. Perhaps you have. So move your tail and let me finish this, please. What if you die? Then you'll remember me as the stubborn human who refused to give up. Could be worse epitaphs. David stood and placed a hand on Ralph's tail. I'm doing this. The only question is whether you help or hinder. Ralph stared at him for another long moment. Then slowly he moved his tail aside. 60 seconds is not enough time. Set it for 90. 90 it is. David adjusted the timer, then carefully placed the overloaded power cell against the base of the slab, right where the fractures intersected. All right, on 3 we both move. I go left to the outcropping, you pull yourself as far back as you can. Ready? No, but proceed anyway. David activated the timer. 1, 2, 3. He ran, his legs pumped, carrying him across the rocky ground faster than he thought possible. Behind him, he heard Ralph dragging himself backward, claws scraping against stone. 90 seconds suddenly seemed very short. David dove behind the outcropping and covered his head with his arms. He counted down in his mind. 5, 4, 3, 2. The world turned white and loud. The explosion echoed across the empty planet like thunder. Rock fragments rained down for several seconds, clattering against the canyon walls. Then silence. David's ears rang. His head throbbed, but he was alive. He pushed himself up and peered around the outcropping. The massive slab had shattered into dozens of pieces, scattered across the canyon floor. And in the center of the debris field, Ralph stood on 4 legs for the first time in over a week. The dragon swayed slightly, testing limbs that had been pinned for so long. His tail swept back and forth. His wings, though damaged, stretched experimentally. He looked down at himself as if unable to believe it was real. I am free, Ralph said quietly. Then louder, I am free. David stumbled forward, grinning despite his exhaustion. Told you it would work. Ralph turned to him, and for a moment David thought the dragon might actually cry. Instead, Ralph lowered his massive head until it was level with David's and very gently pressed his snout against David's chest. Thank you, Ralph whispered. David reached up and patted the dragon's scaled head. You're welcome. They stayed like that for a moment, human and Vrax, connected by something neither species had words for. Then the practical problems reasserted themselves. Your ship is destroyed, Ralph said. We are stranded. Yeah, that's a problem. David looked at the buried remains of his cargo hauler. But we'll figure something out. We're pretty good at figuring things out. Over the next 2 weeks, they survived together. Ralph hunted the small desert creatures that hid in the canyon crevices, sharing the meat with David despite Vrak's custom that said food was never shared. David rigged a solar still from ship parts, creating water from the atmosphere. They complemented each other, covering each other's weaknesses. During the long evenings, they planned. David cobbled together a transmitter using Ralph's translator and salvaged components from the ship. The signal was weak, but it was something. They broadcast on every frequency they could manage, hoping anyone would hear. "Tell me honestly," Ralph said one night, "do you believe rescue will come?" David looked up at the stars. "I believe that giving up is the only guaranteed way to fail. So yeah, I believe someone will come, eventually." "Your optimism is unfounded." "My optimism has kept us both alive so far." David poked at the small fire they had built. "Besides, you said you were going to report to your empire. Can't do that if you're stuck here." Ralph rumbled in agreement. "I have been thinking about what I will say, how I will explain what happened, what I learned. And I will tell them that humans are dangerous, not because of weapons or technology, but because of compassion, because you make allies of enemies, because you refuse to abandon those in need, because you turn the word impossible into a challenge rather than an endpoint." Ralph looked at David. "The Empire fears many things, but I think they should fear human kindness most of all." "That's either a compliment or a threat. Can't tell which." "Both." On the 19th day, their transmitter picked up a response. A Vrak's military vessel had detected the signal and was en route. Estimated arrival, 6 hours. David and Ralph looked at each other. "Your people," David said. "Yes, they will have questions." "Will they hurt you for being helped by a human?" Ralph considered this. "Some will try, but I am prepared to defend what happened here, what you did, what it means." He paused. "I owe you a life debt, David. In Vrak's culture, that is not a small thing." 4 hours later, a second signal came through. A human rescue ship had also detected the transmission. Estimated arrival, 8 hours. When both ships finally arrived, they found David and Ralph standing together in the desert, backlit by the twin suns. The Vrak's military vessel hovered on one side of the canyon. The human rescue ship hovered on the other. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Ralph stepped forward and David followed. They walked to the center of the space between the two ships, clearly visible to both sides. A Vrak's commander emerged from the military vessel, scales gleaming with rank insignia. His eyes widened when he saw Ralph alive. "Surveyor Ralph, we tracked your beacon. We assumed you were dead." "I nearly was. This human saved my life." The commander looked at David with something between suspicion and confusion. "Humans do not save Vraks." "This one did." Ralph's voice carried absolute certainty. "For 19 days he worked to free me from a rockfall. He gave me his water, his food, his energy. He destroyed his own ship to build the tools needed for my rescue. He risked his life repeatedly, asked nothing in return, and refused to leave even when I ordered him to." Ralph placed one clawed hand on David's shoulder. "I owe him a life debt, and I will spend the rest of my days ensuring the Empire understands what that means." From the human ship, a rescue team had emerged. They stared at the scene before them, trying to process what they were seeing. A human and a Vrax standing together like old friends. One of the human rescuers, a woman named Dr. Wells, approached cautiously. "David, are you all right?" "I'm fine, better than fine," David smiled. "Doc, meet Ralph, he's a good friend." "A Vrax friend." "The best kind of friend. The kind who survives impossible things with you." The two ships remained in a tense standoff for several hours. Eventually, diplomacy took over. David would return with the human ship. Ralph would return with the Vrax military. But both promised to meet again, to continue the work they had started in that canyon. As David boarded the rescue ship, he looked back at Ralph one last time. The dragon stood tall, wings spread despite the damage, looking every bit the warrior his species claimed to be. But there was something else there now too, Something softer, something human. Ralph lifted one clawed hand in farewell. David waved back. The ships departed in opposite directions, carrying the two of them back to their respective worlds. But the connection remained, invisible but unbreakable. One human had refused to walk away from one dragon, and in doing so had planted the first seeds of something that might someday become peace. In the empty canyon, the wind blew across the scattered rocks, erasing the signs of struggle. But the memory of what happened there would endure, told and retold across both species. The story of the dragon who could not move and the human who refused to leave him behind. Some called it madness, some called it hope. David called it Tuesday. Just another impossible thing made possible through stubbornness, compassion, and the fundamental human refusal to accept that some people are not worth saving. Everyone was worth saving, even dragons, especially dragons.